The laughter coming from the living room was sharp enough to cut through Lydia Morrison's heart like broken glass. She stood frozen in the hallway, 2 grocery bags hanging from her arms, the smell of fresh vegetables and spices rising faintly toward her face. The door had been slightly open when she arrived home, and the voices inside drifted through the quiet house as if they belonged there. Her husband's voice carried first. Confident. Mocking. "Don't worry," Raymond said between bursts of laughter. "Her family is too broke for her to leave." Another voice followed, lighter, amused. "Vanessa." Lydia felt the blood drain from her face. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Her fingers tightened around the plastic handles of the grocery bags, until they dug painfully into her skin. The tomatoes inside one of the bags rolled gently against each other, unaware that the world they belonged to had just cracked apart. Vanessa giggled. "That's horrible, Raymond," she said playfully. "What if she actually finds out about us one day?" Raymond laughed harder. "Find out and do what?" he said. "Where would she go?" "Back to that dusty village of hers. Her father was a bus conductor who barely made enough money to survive. Her mother sells vegetables by the roadside." He took a slow sip of wine. "She has nothing." Lydia closed her eyes. Each word landed like a hammer. "She didn't even finish college," Raymond continued. "No connections. No money. No confidence. She depends on me for everything. Without me she'd be back selling tomatoes next to her mother." Vanessa laughed again. "So you married her because she was poor?" "Exactly," Raymond replied without shame. "Poor wives don't leave, they're grateful for scraps." The sound of their glasses clinking echoed through the house. They were toasting to Lydia's poverty, to her humiliation, to the illusion Raymond had carefully built around her life. A strange calm slowly spread through Lydia's chest. The pain was still there, burning deeply beneath her ribs, but something stronger was rising above it now: clarity. 3 years earlier, Lydia Morrison had walked into Raymond's life wearing a simple dress and carrying a quiet smile. He had seen her as modest, obedient, soft-spoken. He had believed she was exactly what he wanted. A woman who would never challenge him. What Raymond had never known was that Lydia had been raised by a woman who built an empire from nothing. Grandma Pearl. Pearl Morrison had been a legend in business circles long before she passed away. Starting from a tiny roadside food stall, she had expanded her ventures into catering, agriculture, property development, and investments across multiple cities. She had built wealth the way artists created masterpieces. Patiently, fearlessly, strategically. And she had loved Lydia more than anything in the world. On the night Pearl Morrison died, she had held Lydia's hands and given her one final instruction. "Never tell a man about money before marriage," the old woman had whispered. "Let him show you who he really is first." Her lawyer later explained the condition in the will. Lydia would inherit everything, but only after being married for 3 full years. It was a test. A test of character, a test of love. A test that Raymond Morrison had just failed spectacularly. The 3 years had ended exactly 2 weeks ago. Lydia opened her eyes slowly. The laughter inside the living room continued. She stepped quietly into the kitchen and placed the grocery bags on the counter. Her movements were calm now. Deliberate. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over a contact she had not used in 3 years. "Mr. Henderson," her grandmother's attorney. She typed carefully. "The 3 years are complete. I'm ready to claim my inheritance." She pressed send. Almost instantly, the phone buzzed. "I've been waiting for this message." The reply read. "Your grandmother would be proud." A small smile touched Lydia's lips. In the living room Raymond was still talking. "The best part," he said smugly, "is that she thinks I'm a good husband." Vanessa laughed. "Poor girl." Lydia turned on the stove and began washing the fish she had bought earlier. The knife moved smoothly across the cutting board. Steam slowly filled the kitchen as she started preparing Raymond's favorite meal. Pepper soup. The aroma spread through the house like a quiet promise. When Raymond finally walked into the kitchen half an hour later, adjusting his shirt, smelling strongly of Vanessa's expensive perfume. He found Lydia exactly where he expected her to be. Cooking, silent, obedient. "You're home early," he said casually. "Yes," Lydia replied sweetly. "The market was quick today." Raymond opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of beer. "Good, means you saved some money." "Of course," she said. "We're not made of money," he added. Lydia stirred the soup slowly. "Yes," she replied calmly. "We must be very careful with money." Raymond drank his beer without noticing the subtle change in her voice. He walked toward the bedroom. "I'm taking a shower. Dinner better be ready soon." "It will be," Lydia said softly. The bedroom door closed, and Lydia smiled. The next morning the transformation began. Raymond left for work without paying much attention to her. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, Lydia called a taxi. An hour later she walked into one of the most prestigious law offices in the city. The receptionist stood up immediately. "Mrs. Morrison," she said with respect. "Mr. Henderson is expecting you." Sterling Henderson stood when Lydia entered his office. He had known her grandmother for 40 years. Seeing Lydia sitting across from him felt like watching history continue. "The time has finally come," he said warmly. "Yes," Lydia replied quietly. He opened a thick folder. "Your grandmother's estate currently includes 15 commercial properties, 300 acres of farmland, an extensive jewelry collection, investment portfolios and liquid assets." He looked up. "The total value is approximately $5.2 million. The number hung in the air. Lydia had known the amount, but hearing it spoken aloud felt different. "He built it all from a roadside food stall," she said softly. "Your grandmother was extraordinary," Henderson replied. He slid a stack of documents toward her. "All of this now belongs to you." Lydia signed the papers one by one. With each signature, the life she had been pretending to live for 3 years faded further into the past. "Tell me about your husband," Henderson said gently. Lydia hesitated. Then she told him everything. The affair, the humiliation, the cruel words she had overheard the previous day. By the time she finished, Henderson's expression had hardened. "Well," he said calmly, "in that case I believe we should proceed with the second part of your plan." "What part?" Lydia asked. He smiled slightly. "Your husband works at Sterling Imports, correct?" "Yes. The company is currently struggling financially. They are actively looking for investors." Lydia leaned forward slowly. "How much would it take to buy a majority stake?" Henderson checked a document. "About $800,000. Lydia didn't hesitate. "Do it." The lawyer's smile widened. "I thought you might say that." Over the next week Lydia lived 2 completely different lives. At home she remained the same quiet wife Raymond believed she was. She cooked. She listened politely while he complained about work and bragged about himself. But every afternoon she met with financial advisors, investment managers, and corporate lawyers. She learned about the businesses her grandmother had built. She visited properties. She studied financial reports. And with every passing day she felt something inside her awaken. Strength, confidence, power. By Friday afternoon the deal was complete. Lydia Morrison owned 60% of Sterling Imports. Raymond's company, her company now. That evening Raymond burst through the door looking excited. "Lydia," he shouted. She turned from the kitchen. "Yes, you won't believe this. Some mysterious investor just saved our company from bankruptcy." He laughed proudly. "If things go well I could get promoted." Lydia smiled gently. "That's wonderful." Raymond kissed her forehead absent-mindedly before heading to the living room. He never noticed the quiet satisfaction in her eyes. Very soon, Raymond Morrison was going to discover something he had never imagined. The poor wife he mocked. The woman he believed had nowhere to go. The quiet girl he underestimated was about to become the most powerful person in his entire world. And when the truth finally arrived, it would not knock politely. It would shatter every illusion he had ever believed. Raymond Morrison woke the next morning feeling unusually confident. For the first time in months, the pressure that had been hanging over his office seemed lighter. The company had been drowning in debt, investors had been pulling out, and rumors of layoffs had been circling the building like vultures. Yet somehow overnight, everything had changed. A mysterious investor had stepped in and purchased a majority share of the company. No one knew who it was. But whoever they were, they had saved Sterling Imports from collapse. Raymond adjusted his tie in the mirror and smirked at his reflection. This could be my opportunity, he muttered. He walked into the kitchen where Lydia was pouring tea into 2 porcelain cups. The morning sunlight fell softly across the room, illuminating the calm expression on her face. She looked peaceful, almost radiant. Raymond barely noticed. He grabbed a piece of toast and began speaking excitedly. "You remember I told you about that investor yesterday?" he said. "Yes," Lydia replied gently. "The entire office is in chaos trying to figure out who it is. The board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow night at the Grand Meridian Hotel." He took a bite of toast. "Apparently the new owner wants to meet the entire management team." Lydia nodded slowly. "That sounds important." "It is important," Raymond said proudly. "And I have a feeling this could finally put me in the spotlight. I've been carrying that company for years while the executives take all the credit." He laughed to himself. "Now they'll finally see my value." Lydia sipped her tea quietly. "I'm sure they will." Raymond glanced at her briefly. "You wouldn't understand how corporate politics works," he added casually. "Probably not," she said softly. He finished his breakfast quickly and grabbed his car keys. "Oh. And don't wait up tomorrow night," he said while walking toward the door. "The meeting will probably turn into a celebration party." "Of course," Lydia replied. The door closed behind him. The house fell silent. Lydia sat at the table for several minutes after Raymond left, watching the steam rise slowly from her cup of tea. Her mind was calm, focused. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. Later that afternoon she arrived at one of her grandmother's luxury properties downtown. The building stood tall and elegant, its glass windows reflecting the blue sky like a mirror. Inside, the penthouse office overlooked the entire city. This was now her workspace. When Lydia stepped out of the elevator, several employees greeted her respectfully. "Good afternoon, Ms. Morrison." The sound of that name still felt new. But it also felt right. Inside the office, Mr. Henderson and 2 financial advisors were waiting. "We've finalized the restructuring plan for Sterling Imports," Henderson said, sliding several documents across the table. Lydia sat down and studied them carefully. "Your husband's department is one of the least profitable divisions," one advisor explained. "Sales numbers have been declining for almost 2 years." Lydia's expression remained calm. "What about the rest of the company?" "The logistics division is strong," the advisor continued. "But management has been poorly coordinated." Henderson leaned back slightly. "With the right leadership, the company could double its revenue within 3 years." Lydia closed the folder slowly. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." The advisors exchanged impressed glances. 3 weeks earlier she had been a quiet housewife who rarely spoke in meetings. Now she spoke with calm authority. The transformation was undeniable. "What about the meeting tomorrow night?" Lydia asked. Henderson smiled. "The board believes they're meeting a mysterious investor." He paused. "They have no idea they're about to meet their new CEO." A quiet smile spread across Lydia's face. "That should be interesting." Meanwhile, across the city, Raymond was enjoying the attention at his office. Employees were whispering about the unknown investor who had saved the company. Everyone had theories. Some believed it was an international corporation. Others suspected a wealthy billionaire. Raymond leaned casually against a desk while speaking to his colleague Marcus. "Honestly," Raymond said confidently, "whoever this investor is, they're lucky they stepped in when they did. If the company had collapsed, they would have lost the chance to work with someone like me." Marcus chuckled. "You really believe that?" "Of course," Raymond replied. "I'm the backbone of this place." Across the office, Vanessa sat at her desk pretending to work while listening to the conversation. Later that evening she walked over to Raymond's office and closed the door behind her. "You seem very confident today," she said with a playful smile. Raymond leaned back in his chair. "I should be. If the new owner has any intelligence at all, they'll recognize talent when they see it." Vanessa laughed softly. "Maybe they'll even promote you." Raymond grinned. "That's exactly what I'm expecting." Vanessa walked closer and rested her hand on his shoulder. "Then maybe you'll finally leave that boring wife of yours," she whispered. Raymond shrugged carelessly. "She's harmless," he smirked. "She's too weak to ever challenge me." Vanessa smiled. "I like confident men." The next evening the Grand Meridian Hotel sparkled with golden lights as luxury cars pulled up to the entrance one after another. Inside the ballroom, executives from Sterling Imports gathered nervously around tall glass tables. Everyone was waiting for the mysterious investor. Raymond adjusted his expensive suit and looked around the room. "This place is incredible," Marcus whispered. "Only serious money could afford something like this." Raymond nodded proudly. "Which means whoever bought the company must be extremely wealthy." Vanessa entered the ballroom moments later wearing a stunning red dress. Raymond's eyes lit up. "You look incredible," he said quietly. She smiled. "I thought tonight deserved something special." Soft music filled the room as waiters walked between guests carrying trays of champagne. The tension in the air grew heavier with every passing minute. Finally one of the board members stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced. "Thank you all for coming tonight." The room slowly fell silent. "As you know, Sterling Imports recently received an investment that saved the company from bankruptcy." Several employees nodded nervously. "Tonight you will finally meet the person responsible for that investment." Raymond crossed his arms confidently. This was the moment. If he played his cards right, this mysterious investor might see his potential. The board member smiled. "Please welcome the new majority owner of Sterling Imports." The ballroom doors opened slowly. Every head turned toward the entrance. Footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor. And then Lydia Morrison walked into the room. She wore a deep emerald business suit that fit perfectly against her tall, elegant frame. Her hair was styled neatly, her posture confident, her expression calm. The entire ballroom froze. Raymond's smile slowly faded. His eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment he genuinely believed he was hallucinating. "Lydia," he whispered. But the woman walking toward the stage looked nothing like the quiet wife who cooked dinner every night in their small kitchen. This woman radiated power, confidence, authority. The board member extended his hand respectfully. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced proudly, "meet the new owner and CEO of Sterling Imports, Ms. Lydia Morrison." The silence that followed felt like the entire world had stopped breathing. Raymond stared at the stage as if reality itself had shattered in front of him. The poor wife he mocked, the woman he believed had nothing, was now standing above him as the most powerful person in the company. And the night had only just begun. Raymond Morrison felt as if the air had been ripped out of the room. For several long seconds he simply stared at the stage, unable to process what his eyes were seeing. The elegant woman standing beside the board members looked exactly like Lydia. Yet at the same time she looked like someone entirely different. Her posture was straight and confident. Her presence commanded attention. And the way the executives around her treated her, with immediate respect, made Raymond's stomach twist with confusion. Lydia stepped forward and took the microphone. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice was calm, steady, and unmistakably authoritative. Several people in the room exchanged curious glances. No one had expected the new owner to be someone so young. Even fewer had expected her to carry herself with such quiet power. "I know this must be a surprise," Lydia continued. "Many of you have spent years building this company, and hearing that a new majority shareholder suddenly owns it can be unsettling." Raymond felt sweat forming on the back of his neck. He glanced at Vanessa, who was standing beside him. Her face had turned pale. "Is that your wife?" she whispered. Raymond swallowed hard. I don't understand. On the stage, Lydia continued speaking. My grandmother built a business empire from almost nothing, she said. She started with a single roadside food stall and turned it into an international network of investments, properties and companies. The room listened carefully. Before she passed away, she taught me something important, Lydia continued. She paused for a moment, her eyes moving slowly across the crowd. A business is only as strong as the people inside it. Talent matters. Respect matters. Raymond's heart began to pound harder. Something in her tone made him uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Lydia continued. That is why my first action as the new CEO will be restructuring the leadership structure of Sterling Imports. Murmurs spread quietly through the room. Raymond felt his chest tighten. Restructuring. The word echoed in his mind like a warning bell. Lydia opened a small folder that had been placed on the podium. We have carefully reviewed the performance of every department over the past 3 years. Her eyes moved calmly across the room again. For just a brief second, they landed on Raymond. The look in them was calm, but also cold. Raymond felt his stomach drop. The sales department has unfortunately shown consistent decline during this period, Lydia said. Several employees turned their heads slightly. Everyone knew Raymond managed that department, she continued. Leadership decisions have contributed to this decline, including poor client management, internal miscommunication and unprofessional behavior. The room grew quieter. Raymond felt heat rushing to his face. This cannot continue, Lydia said firmly. Vanessa looked at Raymond nervously. Are they talking about you? She whispered. Raymond didn't answer, he couldn't. His mind was spinning. Lydia closed the folder. However, she continued, this evening is not only about problems. It is also about solutions. She stepped down from the stage and walked slowly toward the crowd. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor. The room instinctively parted to give her space. Raymond watched her approach with growing dread. Every step she took seemed impossibly loud inside his head. When she stopped, she was standing directly in front of him. For a moment neither of them spoke. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him. Hello, Raymond, Lydia said calmly. Her voice was soft. But the silence around them made every word echo. Raymond forced a nervous laugh. Lydia, what is going on? She tilted her head slightly. You mean the company? Yes, he said quickly. This must be some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, she replied. The crowd around them watched carefully now. The tension in the air was impossible to ignore. Raymond lowered his voice. You're embarrassing yourself, he whispered. Just tell them the truth. The truth, Lydia repeated, her eyes remained calm. Yes, Raymond said urgently. You're my wife. You're not some millionaire investor. Several nearby employees overheard the words. They exchanged confused looks. Lydia smiled faintly. Oh, Raymond, she said softly. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a sleek black folder. Inside were several documents. Official documents. Stamped. Signed. Legal. These are the acquisition papers, she said calmly. 60 per Sterling Imports transferred to Lydia Morrison. She handed the folder to him. Raymond stared at the papers with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the numbers. The signatures, the legal stamps. Everything was real. Every word confirmed the impossible truth. Vanessa leaned closer and whispered nervously. Raymond, what does it say? He didn't answer. His face had gone completely pale. Lydia watched him quietly. You seemed very confident yesterday, she said. Raymond looked up slowly. What? You told someone that your wife was too poor to leave you. The words landed like a thunderclap. Several people nearby gasped softly. Raymond's eyes widened with terror. How did you? I heard everything, Lydia said calmly. The silence around them deepened. You said my father was a bus conductor who could barely survive. Raymond's hands began shaking. You said my mother sells vegetables on the roadside. More employees were turning toward them now. The entire ballroom seemed to be listening. And you said, Lydia continued quietly, that poor wives never leave. Raymond's lips moved but no sound came out. Vanessa stepped backward slowly. She suddenly looked very uncomfortable standing next to him. Lydia reached into the folder again and removed another document. She held it out toward Raymond. "Here," she said gently. "What is it?" He asked. "Divorce papers." The room erupted into shocked whispers. Raymond stared at the paper as if it might explode. "You can't be serious," he said. "I am completely serious." His voice cracked. "Lydia, listen, whatever you think you heard. I heard enough." She folded her arms calmly. "You spent 3 years believing I was weak." Raymond shook his head desperately. "I was joking." "You laughed," Lydia replied. The simple statement cut deeper than any accusation. Raymond looked around the room. Every employee was watching now. Some were shocked. Some looked amused. Others looked embarrassed for him. Vanessa quietly moved several steps away. She no longer wanted to be associated with the situation. "Please. Let's talk about this at home." Lydia smiled gently. "You're right." Hope flickered briefly in Raymond's chest. Home would be a good place to talk. She continued. "Unfortunately," she paused. "That house belongs to me too." The last trace of color drained from Raymond's face. "And beginning tomorrow," Lydia added. "Car position at Sterling Imports will also be under review." Marcus, who had been standing nearby, let out a stunned breath. Raymond looked like a man watching his entire world collapse. "Lydia, please," he whispered. She looked at him one last time. Not with anger, not with hatred. Just with quiet finality. "You once said poor wives never leave," she said softly. Her eyes were steady. "But strong women do." She turned and walked calmly back toward the stage. Behind her the entire ballroom remained frozen in stunned silence. Raymond Morrison stood alone in the middle of the crowd, clutching the divorce papers with trembling hands. The man who had mocked his poor wife only days earlier had just discovered the truth. And the consequences of his arrogance were only beginning. He stood near the massive window of his office, staring out over the city he believed he owned. The skyline glittered like a crown beneath the sunset. Towers of glass and steel reflecting the golden light. For years he had told himself that everything he saw existed because of his ambition, his brilliance, his relentless hunger for success. But tonight, for the first time, the view felt different. It no longer looked like a kingdom. It looked like a reminder of what he had lost. Across the city, in a penthouse office that overlooked the same skyline from an even higher floor, she sat quietly at a polished marble desk. The room was calm, elegant, and powerful in its silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, revealing the endless horizon of lights. She held a tablet in her hand, scrolling through reports, numbers, contracts, performance charts. All of them carried her name now. The company that once treated her like an invisible shadow, now moved at the rhythm of her decisions. She placed the tablet down slowly and looked out at the city. The memory of that night still echoed in her mind, the restaurant, the ladder, the humiliation. His voice, his words. "My poor wife." She could still hear the tone. The careless cruelty. The way he laughed while the woman beside him smirked. For a long time she had wondered if those words would haunt her forever. Now she realized something. They had not haunted her. They had transformed her. A quiet knock sounded on the glass door of her office. "Come in," she said. Her assistant stepped inside. "The board meeting is ready." She nodded calmly. As she walked through the hallway, employees stood straighter. Some greeted her with respect. Some with admiration. Some with curiosity. But none of them looked at her with pity. When she entered the boardroom, the long table was already filled with executives. And at the far end of the table sat the man who once believed she was nothing. He looked different now. Not broken, but humbled. Success had once made his posture sharp and arrogant. Tonight his shoulders were quieter. He looked at her as she took the head seat of the table. A seat that once belonged to him. She placed a folder down in front of her. "Let's begin." The meeting unfolded with calm precision. Budgets, expansion strategies, international partnerships. Her voice remained steady, confident, and thoughtful. She didn't rush decisions. She didn't raise her voice. Yet every person in the room listened carefully. Because authority didn't need noise, authority needed clarity. After the meeting ended, the executives slowly left the room. Soon only two people remained. Him and her. The silence was heavy but no longer painful. He looked at her for a moment before finally speaking. You've changed this company. She leaned back slightly. No, she said softly. I revealed what it could become. He nodded slowly. I used to think success meant power, he admitted. But I see now that power without respect is empty. She didn't respond immediately. Because the truth was not something that needed applause. It only needed recognition. Outside the building, the city was alive with movement. Luxury cars glided through illuminated streets. Music echoed from rooftop lounges. The night air carried the quiet hum of ambition. A few weeks later, the company hosted a grand gala. It was an event that brought together investors, entrepreneurs, and media from across the country. The ballroom sparkled beneath chandeliers that reflected thousands of lights. Elegant dresses moved across polished floors. Conversations flowed like champagne. When she entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically. But confidence has a way of bending attention. She walked gracefully through the crowd, greeting partners and investors. Across the room, he watched her. For the first time in his life, he understood something he had never seen before. Strength. Not the loud strength of dominance, but the quiet strength of dignity. The host eventually stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced. Tonight we celebrate the transformation of one of the most remarkable companies in the industry. Applause filled the room. And the visionary behind this transformation. The spotlight turned toward her. Our new CEO. The crowd clapped again as she walked toward the stage. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress. She simply walked with the calm grace of someone who knew exactly who she had become. When she reached the microphone, the room grew silent. She looked across the audience. Some faces were curious, some skeptical, but all of them were listening. I want to tell you a simple truth, she began. Success is not born from comfort. Her voice carried through the room with calm authority. It is born from moments when people doubt you, underestimate you, or try to reduce your worth. She paused briefly. Years ago, someone told me I was nothing. The audience listened carefully. And for a moment, I believed it. She let that sentence settle. But life has a strange way of revealing something powerful. What others call weakness can become your greatest strength. What others call failure can become your foundation. And what others call poor, she smiled gently, can become priceless. Applause erupted across the ballroom. But she wasn't finished. Luxury, she continued, it's not just about money. It is about freedom. Freedom to grow. Freedom to learn. Freedom to become someone stronger than the person you were yesterday. The applause grew louder. Across the room, he watched her, not with regret, but with respect. Because the woman standing on that stage was not the quiet wife he once ignored. She was a leader, a visionary, a force. Later that night, as the gala ended and guests slowly left the ballroom, she stepped out onto a private balcony. The city stretched endlessly beneath the night sky. Lights sparkled like constellations across the streets. He approached quietly and stood beside her. For a moment neither of them spoke. Finally he said softly, "You turned pain into power." She looked out at the skyline. "No," she replied calmly, "I turned it into purpose." The wind moved gently across the balcony. "And purpose," she continued, "stronger than revenge." He nodded slowly. "I wish I understood that sooner." She glanced at him. "Most people understand it too late. But the ones who grow understand it eventually." They stood there in silence for a moment, not as enemies, not as lovers, but as two people who had witnessed the transformation of a life. The woman he once mocked had become something far greater than he ever imagined. And as the city lights shimmered across the horizon, one truth became undeniable. The greatest luxury in the world was not wealth, not power, not status. It was becoming the person no one believed you could be, and proving that dignity, patience, and quiet strength can rewrite any story. Because sometimes the woman they call poor is the one who ends up owning everything that truly matters.